Okay, thank you all for joining us today on our second official session of our Financial Wellness Forum. Today, we're going to be talking about how to choose the right financial advisor for your needs and talking about what their role is and how to use one most effectively. Really appreciate you guys joining us. This Financial Wellness Forum is something of a passion project for me. To bring financial literacy and education to those in our community, whether they be real estate professionals, past clients, future clients, and just about anyone else. So if any of you attending or watching the recorded session have other people, family members, friends, this is open to everyone. It's complimentary. We don't charge for this. We really just want to make sure that we're doing our part to get good information out there and to help our community get more intelligent with their financial decisions, because we do see a lot of decisions being made that aren't really based in true financial literacy. And that's why we're here today. So I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Scott Cahan. Scott, why don't you take the reins and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Scott Cahan, I'm a certified financial planner. We're located in New York. We have an office in Westchester County, Chappaqua, as well as a location in Manhattan. I've been doing this for many, many years, more than I want to remember. I started my own firm back in 1986 when I realized working for a big firm, we could not do the best job for the client. And we've been independent since as a fee-only financial planner, investment management firm. And we help people identify goals, objectives, and plan for their future.
That's great. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you did just win a pretty special award. So I'm gonna encourage you to boast just a little bit. I know it's not your DNA, but
no,
it's about the award that you just got.
Yeah, I've been awarded the P. Kemp Fain Jr. Award from the Financial Planning Association, which is really an award that they give out to someone usually annually for their work that they've done in the profession, not just about clients, but I serve on a board called the Foundation for Financial Planning, where we provide funding and organizations to work with the underserved populations, with families who've suffered through cancer, military families as well as my involvement with the profession and working on the national and local boards for the organization. And just for the years that I've been around, sooner or later, I guess they had to give it to me since I'm still here.
Well, I from working with you closely with our clients, I can tell you it's not, you weren't just awarded that because you're there. Scott has been a great partner. We originally met through the Financial Planning Association that I'm a big proponent of for people in the industry. And it's a great organization that does a lot of amazing things. And Scott's been a leader within that group for a long time. So Scott, welcome. We are thankful to have you, and thank you for sharing your time with everybody to share your insight. So for those of you who are joining live, we'd love to hear from you as far as where you're dialing in from. We do have people from all around the country dialing in today, all four corners, so to speak. So if you could put in the Q&A, not the chat, but the Q&A, let us know where you're dialing in from, what city you're in, and if there are any questions that come up or any topics you want to make sure we cover today. By all means, pop them in that Q&A, and we will make sure that we get to everything. If not during the session, then definitely at the end when we'll do a more formal Q&A. Menlo Park, oh, great, okay. Boston, very good. All right, so we've got both coasts represented already in the first 10 seconds of opening that up. So Scott, one of the things that I noticed, and the reason why this particular session is so important to me personally, is that being in the mortgage industry, we talk to people about the big financial moves that they're making. And what we often find is that people that are making, especially their first purchase and many making subsequent purchases, is a major financial fork in the road. And what we found is that most people are not getting professional financial advice. So they're making decisions that are based on their own experiences or maybe a family experience. But we really wanted to bring education to this because in my opinion, I use the analogy that the financial advisor is really the quarterback of somebody's financial profile. And I think people might underestimate the impact that a financial advisor can have in their lives. And I'm a big proponent of getting professional financial advice because it could completely change the trajectory of your financial profile, your retirement, and so many other things. So maybe you can explain a little bit about what the role of an advisor is, what different types of topics, or issues you talk about with your clients, just to kind of give people a broad overview.
Yeah. So as a financial planner, the goal is to help clients plan their future. And, we always describe it, if you want to go from New York to California, or in this case, California to Boston or whatever, in a car, you can get in the car, go, and you may get there, you may get lost, you may break down. If you plan your journey beforehand, though, what stops you want to make, be prepared in case of a contingency that you break down or you get lost, or you want to make a side trip. The roadmap that you put together in advance, that's the financial planning. That's the process. That's your financial journey, as we like to say. The car will get you somewhere. Your investments will get you somewhere. Your tax planning or tax returns, your insurances, estate planning, all of that will get you somewhere. The question is, it coordinated where you want to go? And when with financial planning is a process. People think, oh, it's a one-shot deal. It's really ongoing, because think about your lives. How often do things change in your lives? What you thought would happen, and all of a sudden, you're thrown a curve, something else happened, good or bad, and that you have to deal with it. And that's where the planning process has to be ongoing. And the terms out there, and this is where it gets confusing, because there's financial advisor, financial planner, financial consultant, investment advisor, you name it, every term under the sun, and it can be very confusing. And that's why we always tell people, look for a certified financial planner, because there's certain requirements that a CFP has that others don't. But there's a lot of confusion just in what I would say is the financial services industry, where true financial planning and financial planners are the professional part of the bigger industry, just like a doctor is a professional, or a nurse in a medical industry that includes pharmaceuticals and everything else. So that's a quick description of planning your journey, and that's where planning comes in.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. I've actually never heard that before, but driving cross country, there are sites you want to see and experiences you want to have. And if you don't have a plan for them, you're probably going to drive right past them and not even realize you could have enjoyed it. So that's a great analogy. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe you could talk about the different components of what an advisor might advise on, whether it be retirement planning or life insurance, like just the components of what a financial plan would look like.
Basically, when it's done properly, it's really touching on everything tied to your financial life. So as a financial planner, when we start with a client, we want to look at everything. We want to look at all your insurances, your employee benefits. This is the time of the year people have open enrollment. And many times they're leaving benefits off the table that they didn't think of that could be valuable. Maybe they're underinsured and there's a good way of getting insurance there. Or maybe there's sometimes a legal reimbursement or legal fees that the firm will pay, for estate planning. So those are just little pieces, but it's really looking at retirement planning, education planning, buying a home, making sure you're insured properly, making sure your tax planning is being done. Many times people are using CPAs, but are they doing it just to prepare their tax return, or are they planning? And more often than not, it's preparation. Estate planning. I can't tell you how often clients with young children have not done their estate planning because they can't figure out who to name as a guardian for their children if something happens. So they just figured nothing will happen, but there's things that need to be discussed. And that's basically where we get involved in, is talking about everything tied to your financial life. And the last thing I'll say here, we always tell people, ask before you make a decision, because it's easier to help you make the right decision than to try to figure out how to clean up if it was not the right decision.
Yeah. And I think you touched on one as far as estate planning, which is incredibly important. All of the components there are important, but you hear these horror stories about these people who are ultra wealthy who did not do any estate planning. I think Prince is one of the examples. And you know, the person passes away and there's no instructions on what they want to, you know, what they're wanted done with their fortune. Even if you don't have a fortune, you still probably want to be able to direct that. So and that's part of, you know, part of the overall financial plan that you put together with an advisor. It's in my opinion, it's just getting all the different, like a financial advisor or planner will help you put all these components in order. It'll get your financial life organized and make sure that you're not missing out on those things. And people that don't have estate plans and don't do tax planning can take a major hit, you know, if things aren't set up properly.
Right. And one thing I'll add in is, you know, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, a planner is the quarterback of a team, and that's how we view it. We're not attorneys, so we can't provide legal advice, but we can look at estate planning documents to see if they're done properly. There are times we'll look at documents that a lawyer drafted or the client has signed, and it doesn't meet what the client's trying to do, but it was never reviewed with the client. So at least we can look at that, make sure beneficiaries are in place, make sure documents are in order, working with the accountant to make sure the tax planning is done, working with the insurance agent to make sure that the insurance that is being recommended or what we're recommending is appropriate for the client. So it's really a coordinated effort. It's not, you know, there are planners out there who can do it all, but in many cases you have to be careful.
Yeah, there's people in real estate that try to do mortgages and insurance and everything else. It's, you know, you're either an expert at one thing or nothing. So in my opinion, but now you touched on this briefly about the CFP or Certified Financial Planner designation. Can you explain how that works and what it takes to obtain that?
Yeah, so the CFP marks, they're a little 50 some odd years old, and there's approximately, I think, close to 100,000 certified financial planners. There are probably 3, 4, 5 times of that of people who call themselves financial advisors, financial planners, and whatever. And there's a lot of holes in the regulation, but to be a CFP, you have to pass an exam. You've got to go through usually 2 years of studying to prepare for the exam. You've got to have an undergraduate degree as well. And the main thing is what they call the 4 E's: education, exam, experience, because you have to have a certain amount of years of experience, even if you pass the exam before you can use the marks, and ethics. Every 2 years, we have to get CEU credits, you know, continuing education credits. 2 of them must be in ethics. So those are what they look at, the 4 E's. So it hopefully is holding the CFP to a higher standard than anybody out there calling themselves a planner or an advisor. Because again, there's a lot of holes in the regulation that's out there today.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Is there, in order to call yourself any sort of financial advisor, whatever term you want to use, people who advise people on finances, is there a licensing required no matter what? And then the CFP is an additional designation, or is licensing potentially not even required for some people who kind of dabble in it?
Yeah, good question. So if you're not selling what I'll call products, insurance, if you're selling insurance, you have to be licensed with the state insurance departments. If you're selling investments for through a brokerage firm, you have to be licensed and pass exams for the brokerage business. If you're just charging people fees, theoretically, you should be registered as an investment advisor with either the Securities and Exchange Commission or the local state, departments. Those are the regulatory areas. If somebody is out there just holding, themselves out as an advisor, planner, and they're not selling product, they're just charging fees, yes, they can kind of squeeze in there and, not be regulated. The other thing is you see commercials today, insurance companies, banks, brokerage firms, everybody's doing planning, everybody's provided. I always tell people, look at what who the person works for, because that's an indication of how they're approaching it. Many times people who work for an insurance company, even if they're CFPs and they're financial planners or whatever, their answer many times is insurance. That seems to fit everybody's needs as a savings vehicle, protecting life, retirement. It doesn't do all that properly. If you work in the brokerage business, it's about managing money. And this is the issue we run into many times in this profession, is that a lot of smaller clients and may have very good incomes, but they don't have a lot of assets to manage. And many times the brokerage firms, it's about assets under management. They'll charge you, let's say, 1% to manage it, but you've only got 50 or 100 or 200 or $300,000. They may not be wanting to deal with you because you don't have enough. So they're looking for the big accounts, but the reality is everybody needs financial planning. That's where sometimes the fee only or smaller planning firms, or the independent boutiques, as I say, can work with all types of different clients.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into the different models, because I think that's really one of the main things I wanted to cover today. But what I found in my own business and interacting with clients is that the people that need financial planning the most are those people that you described, that don't have millions of dollars in the bank. They have every dollar counts, as opposed to ultra wealthy, who are more than happy to pay for financial planning and asset management and all the other things that you mentioned. But I really want to bring awareness to the fact that you don't have to be ultra wealthy to have a financial advisor and to benefit from working with one. In fact, it might even be the opposite. The stronger need may be for people that don't have that, who are trying to build it over time and really, create a legacy within their family and just live a more comfortable life.
Exactly. To be able to, buy your home, send your kids to college, retire one day, having, those are basic goals separate from, whatever else you may throw in there. And people who are living, I don't want to say paycheck to paycheck, but funding a 401k, but don't have a lot of excess money. They're looking to build it up. Those are the people that often, need more planning. It's time consuming because a lot of it is cash flow management. And a lot of planners don't want to be bothered with it.
Right. Budgeting, all that type of stuff. Yeah, it's something that an asset manager doesn't usually want to deal with. Maybe they might help you if you have millions of dollars in an account with them. They might help you with that, or have a side person within their company who might offer that just because they don't want to lose the assets under management.
Exactly.
But it's really kind of an afterthought is what I've experienced. Okay, can you explain what a fiduciary is and why that's how that is relevant to the industry?
Yes. I mean, fiduciary should be a straightforward term. It's basically putting the client's interests ahead of yours. And we act as fiduciaries. A lot of planners I know act as fiduciaries. There's, with the CFP board and the CFP regulations, there's full disclosure that has to be done. So what happens is many times though, people are saying they're fiduciary. It's the buzzword out there. Everybody now is a fiduciary. If you were working for, let's say, an insurance company, providing financial planning, and your main recommendations seem to be more insurance related, it's hard to say that you're really a fiduciary, because you many times have a fiduciary relationship with your employer. If you have a fiduciary relationship with your employer, how do you have a same fiduciary relationship with your client? You can't put two entities both ahead of yourself and ahead of each other, because it just doesn't make sense. So that's where there's sometimes conflicts, and that's where, and we'll probably get into it, the questions to ask and how to look for a financial advisor or planner.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing, because I think, and it's similar in the mortgage industry where people throw around these terms, we're a fiduciary, we're this, we're that. But you're right, there are conflicts of interest with certain potentially types of advisors or bad apples, so to speak, who will claim to be that, but in practice aren't really looking out for your interests. We've seen definitely some that have that are sort of in-house at large retail banks, where we'll see a client profile, they're like, oh, this is my financial advisor who works at this big financial firm. And then you look at their asset statements, and almost all of their assets are in funds attached to that same company. And we've had situations before where clients of ours were actually an advisor who worked at those firms. And we had a great relationship, and he said, I think you're great, but I can't refer you because my company doesn't allow me to refer out. Even though he chose to use us for his financing for various reasons. He said, I would love to refer you, but I can't. My company won't let me, and that's sort of goes.
They may be saying they're a fiduciary as well, which obviously that may not be the case.
Yeah, you can say it all day long, but if you don't practice it, those are two very different things. There's a lot of people that call themselves mortgage advisors who just quote rates for a living. That's basically the analogy we see in our industry. Okay, so let's dive into some of the different types of advisors and planners, and maybe some of the, just very top level kind of benefits and drawbacks to each. So, like fee only, assets under management. I know there are some that are hybrid. And then I think maybe we can also touch on like some special purpose firms that are tied to a cause, or those seem to be a little more popular. There's one I know of that we work with that it helps our clients invest in women-owned businesses, for example. And then there's a new thing that's also kind of come out about financial therapists. So I kind of want to get your opinion on that as well. But maybe we'll cover that in a second. But just kind of the basic models of different types of companies or people that are in the industry.
Right. So it goes back to really compensation methods. So fee-only planners like ourselves and others around the country, we only charge clients fees. Most of the time it's paid by what they call asset under management. So if they're managing $1 million or 2 million, they're charging maybe 1%, maybe a little less, a little bit more, what they're managing, and it changes every quarter based on the market values. They may be charging a separate fee for financial planning, or they may be including it all. And that is one method. The other way of fee only, which is more, it's growing in popularity. It's what we do. We look at a total net worth. We have a fee schedule. We lock the fee in for 3 years, and every 3 years we adjust it based on the total net worth, not including real estate. Then you have commission only planners, and they're compensated based on what they sell. So if they're working at an insurance company, they're selling insurance, that's how they're paid. Even though they may be doing planning, it's really to sell a product. Or if they're at a brokerage firm, even people in banks, sometimes bankers get paid points to bring in a client for mortgage or something else, or accounts. And clients don't realize that. The other type is the hybrid, the fee and commission. Sometimes it's called fee-based. Whenever I hear that term, to me, it doesn't mean fee only. It means that they're charging fees and they can earn commissions. Are they? It's hard to say. We see a lot of people with the big brokerage firms, for instance, where they are putting your money in a managed account where the manager through the firm are charging, let's say 1%, and they are supposedly doing financial planning, and it may be all inclusive in that fee, it may not be. And the main thing I always tell people is ask questions. Ask people how they're compensated. Full disclosure, years and years ago, we were on the fee and commission side, and we told the client what the fee is. And if we earned a commission, we disclosed it and we offset the fee. That's all. But the bottom line is you should know how your planner advisor is being compensated. And if they won't answer, they can't answer. Is it a good relationship if they can't answer a basic question of how much you're making from me being a client? So those are the kind of the fee only, the hybrid, which is the fee offset, or not offset, but the fee and commission, and then the commission only. Those are usually the standard models out there.
Okay, and commission only would include just somebody who's more or less an asset manager, where they're managing.
No, and if they're an asset manager, they're probably fee only. They're charging a percentage of what they're managing. I view that sometimes like a commission, but whatever. That's not my personal issues I have with the whole financial services industry. But the reality is that they're charging a fee. And the good and the bad is that if the markets take a hit, like we've seen this year, their fees go down. But on the other hand, if you think about it, how often do people need more help when the markets are going down, and then they're being paid less? It just, as a fee model, makes no sense. So it's really, when you get into the commission side of it, it's going to be, most of the time, it's going to be the insurance companies, sometimes the big wirehouses. And many times what they do in a big firms is they're putting part of your money in a managed account where it's, let's say, 1%, and another part of it they're putting into mutual funds where they're paid a commission, and they're managing that. And people are, I would say 9 out of 10 times, if not 100% of the time, people have no idea what they have, because they're trusting the person they're working with. And I'm not saying one method is necessarily better than the other, but if you know what you're paying, you can make the right decisions.
Absolutely. And then maybe you could just touch briefly on some of these more unique, I wouldn't say fringe type of arrangements, but there are some companies that only manage assets that are invested in special purposes, whatever it may be. And then the financial therapist as well. It's just kind of another thing that's coming on the
So
horizon.
there are definitely groups out there that work with special, women's groups, that they look for management of investments and whatever, and try to stay more onto, women who are managing it and so on. And most of the time, that's fine, as long as the choices they're making, look, there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of investment choices between mutual funds, exchange traded funds, individual stocks, bonds, whatever. So if they can match what the allocation should be based on the client's goals and objectives, and that's the planning process, that could work fine. Some of them, I mean, there's a lot of, when you get into other areas of management, you have to just make sure that whatever they say they're doing, they really are walking the walk, because many times they're not necessarily doing that. As far as the financial therapist, it's that, and it also gets into financial coaching. And it's confusing sometimes. What's a financial coach or therapist versus a financial planner? Sometimes there's no difference. Sometimes there's a lot of differences. When you get into behavioral finance, and this is probably getting deeper than we need to, but how you handle money goes back to how you were raised and how you saw your family managing money. And often people in a relationship, spouses, partners, whatever, have completely different views of how to manage money, and different views of spending and so on, and how to bring that together. And we have clients that call us their financial therapist. Years ago, I had a client who was a therapist, and he used to, basically call me his therapist for money. We have clients often that, we'll be talking to them, and, all of a sudden it gets emotional about money, or they're arguing and they apologize because they think we never deal with this. And I tell them we deal with this more often than you think. But there are definitely people who just deal with coaching and therapy on finances. They're not there to implement. They're usually not going to do real financial planning, but they are serving a need that is often there, that people need to work through issues dealing with money, because money has a lot of ties to it, good, bad, and indifferent, a lot of guilt sometimes when you come into money, especially.
It does. Yeah. Where we see that is in sometimes succession planning for families that are handing money down to their children, and maybe those children are not on the same page about the distribution or how it should be handled, or and some have control over each other's trust, and it gets messy. And then you have people who are either mingling finances because they're joining forces in marriage, or combining households of, and then also in divorce as well.
Right.
Those are the ones that we see often. And money is definitely emotional. It's probably, I think, I don't know, I saw some statistic that was one of the biggest causes of divorce, because it's so emotional and so powerful, and it's not easy to manage. And that's
a
why
lot of times people say, if I came into money, if I won the lottery, everything would be good. And we've had clients that won the lottery or inherit a lot of money, and doesn't change anything. It just means they can spend more, and often they're spending too much at that point. But it really doesn't change their lives drastically in many ways, because they now have to deal with that money, and it's not always easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that topic, a lot of people, you mentioned, kind of get advice from family members, or they get advice based on, their parents or their grandparents who, did well financially and made some choices at those times, but maybe they don't have the same perspective of what's going on now. So maybe you can talk a little bit about people who think that they can get financial advice, or the benefits or drawbacks, from family members, from CPAs, from other people that aren't necessarily in the financial planning community per se.
Yeah. So the first thing I use as an analogy is, if you're getting advice from your family members, would you ask your family members for medical advice if they're not a doctor?
Right.
Probably not. I mean, you may crowdsource and get 4 million opinions, but it doesn't mean it's right. So working with somebody who knows the area and really can do it professionally makes sense. And finding the right financial planner, as we talked about a little bit, can be difficult too sometimes. But you want to make sure that the people you're engaging are there and have the expertise to provide you with the right advice and the right services. As far as CPAs and attorneys, we have a few clients I work with, an accountant who is always telling them, he's very conservative, put everything in treasuries. Now, right now, treasury yields are higher, but long term, that is not always the best place. So many times CPAs, they don't have the expertise in financial planning and investments. Many times attorneys, they don't have the expertise for sure in a lot of these areas. And usually attorneys are not going to cross over. They realize the legal liabilities of doing so. There are CPAs that definitely are trained in financial planning, and that's okay if they're competent. But you really need to be careful that many times people don't want to pay for advice. And that's really what the issue comes down to. And if you go to 5 financial planners, advisors, you could get 5 different models of how this works. And that's where, asking the right questions is important. But I always tell people, stay in your lanes. Meaning if you're a CPA and accountant, stay in your tax planning. We want to work together for tax planning. If you're an attorney, same thing. If you're getting advice from your family or parents because they've done very well, many times when you start to get into people's finances, sometimes they're lucky, sometimes they did well. What they did may not be the right choice for you, because so many people look at financial planning, it's just money, it's just managing your money. It's not. The car, like I said, it will get you somewhere, but unless you know where you're going, it doesn't help. And asking a family member, they don't know what your journey is or what you want to do. It's a conversation of what's important to you.
Right. Yeah. And if you look back, let's say 50 years ago, if you're getting advice from someone who built wealth 50 years ago, the landscape looked completely different.
Yeah.
It's probably, correct me if I'm wrong, probably mostly, blue chip type of stocks. And now you've got startups, you've got cryptocurrency, you've got, all sorts of different alternative investments that just didn't even exist then. So the strategies have to adapt to the times.
The strategies do, and Wall Street is great for developing products to get people to put money into things that they probably, in many cases, have no idea what they're investing in. And I'm not saying everybody has to know everything, but there are products out there sometimes that people should just avoid. And I'll use Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as an example. I'm not saying people should avoid them, but when I get questions from people who never would ever ask a question like that, why shouldn't we put money in there? What it says to me is they're following what the media is talking about and how much money people have talked they made. And it's probably a time that we're getting close to the top of a market, and really to be careful, because once everybody's talking about it, usually
it's too late, right?
Too late. Time to get out, maybe.
You've missed the golden opportunity if everyone's already talking about it. So same thing with real estate.
Yeah.
So as far as the cost of financial planning, which I know varies and the models vary, but again, we find that people that are higher net worth tend to justify the cost, and others don't. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how the cost relates to what benefits a client can actually have over the long run. Because I think when people understand that, I think they'll understand that even if they don't have, if they have, let's say, $50,000 in the bank and they're thinking, oh, I don't want to pay for a financial advisor to manage $50,000, they're not necessarily thinking about it the right way.
Right. So the first thing I would tell people is, don't think about managing $50,000. Think about it as managing and helping you on your life's journey. Because somebody has $50,000 or whatever number, first questions I'm asking, what are your goals? Where do you want to be? When do you want to retire? If you have children, what kind of college education? Private, public? Should they have some skin in the game? Do you want to pay for it all? And many times spouses or parents have different, views of that. So what is, do you want to buy a new house? Do you want to buy a second home? What are you trying to accomplish? What's your journey? And then figuring out, how the money plays into that. And that's the key, because most of the time, the people who have 50,000 in the bank can't get good advice, because the bank may say, yeah, we can help you. More often than not, they're putting them into either mutual funds or annuities, which people don't understand that many times they're locked in for a period of time, or selling insurance or something. So if they don't have a lot, it's hard to find a financial planner that'll work with them, because they want to charge an asset under management fee of 1%, and they may have a $500,000 minimum, or sometimes a $2 or $3 million minimum.
Right.
So people have to look for the planners, and there are resources. We tell people, if you go to the CFP board, which is basically a regulatory group, the Certified Financial Planner, you can screen there and find CFPs in your area. You can go to the FPA, Financial Planning Association, and they have planner search, screen for CFPs in your area. So there are ways to find financial planners and get information and interview some to see if they will work with you, and you want to work with them, find the right people.
Yeah, and I definitely want to touch on that in just a minute, because I think that's really important, because there's, just like mortgages, there is way too much information out there, just way too much, and it doesn't help consumers. I think it confuses them and makes them somewhat paralyzed as far as making these decisions. So I definitely want to get into that.
Just to go back to, the thing is to take away the emphasis from the money and put the emphasis on your life. Look at it from a holistic viewpoint, a 30,000-foot level. What is my life? What am I looking to accomplish? What are my goals and objectives? That's planning. Not about, oh, I got money in the bank, so what do I do with it? Figure out what you want to do, and then figure out how the money fits in.
Right. So it's not about making the money grow from 50 to 60 to 70 and then some. That's part of it, but that's only a small fraction of what people need to be thinking about.
Yeah, otherwise they're in a car driving around trying to find, their destination, and have no idea where they're going.
Right. Yeah, just based on the sun up above, which direction they might be headed. Okay, and then what about getting advice off the internet? Because there's so many resources out there of, oh, buy this stock, buy that stock, or other types of financial advice. What's your take on people diagnosing their finances on the internet?
There's too much information out there. It can be very dangerous. And that's the problem we see, is that people are making, I remember years ago, I was on back in the days of radio call-in shows, doing a few shows, and I've been on CNBC answering, live questions years ago. And you're answering it generically for people. It's not as specific as it should be, because we could have 3 clients, same exact ages and money and everything, but their goals are different. So the information that's out there on the internet and, on TV and CNBCs of the world and so on, it can be more generic than you need. It's not as specific to you. So, but everybody, will get information today. If somebody has a medical problem, they go online and they find 10 different people to give them recommendations. Sometimes there's consistency, sometimes not. So you have to be very careful.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, one tool I would say though, like using something like mint.com is something that's good as an app, because it helps you to manage your finances, your money, your budgets, and so on. And that's a key part, managing your cash flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying earlier, for people that maybe don't have millions of dollars in the bank, including myself, the budgeting is a really important piece of it, because like I said, every dollar counts, as you're growing your financial wherewithal over time. So I'm glad you mentioned Mint. That was one thing that I had on my list to ask.
And just to add on to that, when we do the planning, many times people have a few different goals, and we say how much you need to save for each of the goals. And then people say, well, I can't afford to do that. So we have to talk about, okay, what are the priorities? You could borrow for education for your children. You can't borrow for retirement. Are you willing to work later? Are you willing to have less in retirement if you want to retire early? What are the trade-offs so that you can make the proper decisions now that you can reach your goals? Because many times people don't even think about that. And it's knowing, it goes back to cash flow and budgeting.
Yeah, just put money in a 401k and assume that they're going to retire very comfortably. down the road and hope that the time that they retire is when their 401k is at a peak of value and not a dip. It's not always work that way. Yeah. So, okay, so let's talk about, I want to kind of end this conversation with a discussion about how to find the right advisor. And you mentioned a couple of online resources through the Financial Planning Association, another one. Like what would what should people be asking? What criteria should they use to gauge who might be the right type of advisor for them?
Obviously, one of the first questions is compensation, how you're compensated. I would tell people, if they work for a big insurance firm or brokerage firm, are you going to recommend mainly insurance or your company's products? Or do you have the independence to find the best products and the best solutions for me and my family? So that's an important question. How are they compensated, really? I guess before that, looking for CFPs, certified financial planners. I think that's crucial in this process. It doesn't mean that every CFP is good. Doesn't mean that non-CFPs can't do a good job, but at least there is a criteria. There's education, ethics, exams, and that tie into that. So CFP, how they're compensated, and interview a few different planners. Many times asking friends for referrals of someone they're comfortable with. I mean, in all honesty, majority of our clients are referral based. We could do all the social media as we want out there, but the reality is people come in because they were referred from other clients. And obviously we have confidentiality, but we're helping them. So that's where the comfort level will start. So asking family and friends who they're using is fine, but don't rely on that person only. And the other thing is, find someone that you're comfortable with. I've had people come into us that they met with other firms and they just didn't like, or they're switching to us. They just didn't like the people, or the person made them feel bad for making a decision. We taught early on in this business, one, listen to what people are saying. Two is to make sure that in listening, we're following what you're looking to do, not what we think is best. I mean, sure, somebody can come in, I know what, kind of have a sense of what direction we may go in, but it may not, and that's where the listening comes in. So if the personalities don't work with, your family with the planner, then they can be a great planner, but it may just not be a good fit. You want someone you're comfortable talking to, because when you get into planning the proper way, you get into issues of things you've never discussed if you're a couple together. And we have many times when people say, we've never talked about that. And these are the important conversations that many times people avoid, is the money conversations.
Right. And nothing forces them to have that conversation more than having an quote unquote outsider sitting in front of them, having those discussions and bring up the topics that they may be a little nervous to bring up on their own.
Right. And that's where the listening and the discussion part is the most important versus the money part. The money is important, but having that discussion and figuring out what to do is key.
It's difficult. Yeah. And sometimes people that don't have advisors will come, for example, to us for a mortgage application. We've had situations before where one person of the couple reached out to us privately and said, please don't let them know about the debt that I have. Like that's playing with fire. And when you're on the same loan application, not so easy to hide from the other person who's sitting at the closing table signing the same loan application that you're signing. But we do see that type of thing fairly often, where people who have joined in life together may not have fully disclosed all of the challenges that they may have. And that's why, money matters are really critical for people who are joining forces in life in general. So let's use a real life example. So I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. So what's the worst mistake you've ever seen somebody make that didn't have an advisor, like that just, God, you wish you had talked to them beforehand so that you could have advised differently? I
would say the biggest mistake I see people have is now they're ready to retire and they come in for financial planning. Like, okay, I'm retiring and this is what I need. And we go through the numbers, say, that's not going to last you. people look at retirement as an end goal. Well, most people, if you retire, you're in the 60s today, you've got a third of your life ahead of you. And most people go into retirement, they have no idea. They have all these projects and goals, and after 3 months, they said, okay, I've done it all, now what do I do? You have a third of your life ahead of you. So coming in at that point, it's like college, okay, my kid's going to college next semester, I need to plan now. You missed that opportunity. College you can
Right.
borrow for, you can't for retirement. So I think that's the biggest area that we've seen, a problem, that people come in too late to deal with something.
Right.
And now all we can work it with is what we have versus what could have been.
Right.
So
Which is
that I
probably
think
still a
it's,
valuable service, but you could have been more valuable if they brought you
yeah,
in earlier.
it's
Yeah.
tough to tell somebody, you retired already, and you need $100,000, let's say, to live on, and you're gonna run out of money in about 8 years. And I've had that experience, having to tell people, you need to cut back extremely, fine tune your budget way down, or, find another job. And just as some of this is personal, because without getting too deep into it, I mentioned that behavioral finance, we learn from what we experienced. My parents were in the garment center in New York. Their accountant told them when he was my father, 51, you can retire. They continued living the same lifestyle. I was just getting into the business. First plan I ever did, I said, you're going to be out of money in 9 years. And the reality was, it was probably 10 or 11 years, because they made some changes. And I wound up supporting them for years. I mean, my father recently passed away at 93. So that left such a mark that this really happens. This stuff is
does.
real. And if you don't get the good advice, because they got bad advice from an accountant, they never planned. They went into something blind that, oh, they can do this. And it happens more often than not. Now, today, people have, through work, they have their 401ks and things like that. I would say another big mistake. People who've done their own planning, and I've had this a couple of times, people come in and they say, well, I want someone to look at it. And we'll look at it. And I remember a case a few years ago, they did their own planning. There was a teacher getting a pension. They inputted the pension twice by accident. So yeah, retirement looked great. The reality is, when we pointed that out, retirement did not look good at all. So they're doing their own planning, and all of a sudden now they made decisions based on that, and they were in trouble.
Yeah, and I've seen clients who, just to give my own war story, where they're coming in for a refinance or a purchase or whatever it may be, or trying to figure out how can they purchase. And young working family, like a young family making really good money, $500,000 a year, and they've got $1.5 million in retirement, and they're living paycheck to paycheck because they put so much into retirement. They're not thinking about, like, I have to send my kids to school in a few years when they are not in diapers anymore. And we've seen a lot of those profiles that are just completely out of whack with what they might need in the short term, while also focusing on the long term. So
yeah. And I would say another issue we've run into, and less these days, because you'll know better than I, how mortgages work. But years ago, people, I mean, you barely needed to fog a mirror to get a mortgage, and people were just so over leveraged. And we saw that in the savings and loan crisis back in the 80s. We saw it during 2007, 8, 9. People just were able to get mortgages they could never afford. And then when the real estate values went down and they lost their job, they were in trouble. Today, it's things are underwritten much more carefully, and that's good. If anything, people complain about the process, but I've told people it's protecting you in the long run.
Right. And you mentioned, your own experience, which is actually really powerful, because if you don't plan ahead, you could potentially be putting a significant financial burden on somebody else you care about, and, sounds like you were able to find a way to make it work for your family, but some people may not be. And then what, like the implications are really significant.
They are. And, that's why the sandwich generation, you're taking care of your kids and your parents. And all my clients always say, I don't want to be dependent on my children. But many times they wind up being, I mean, usually we have the children as our clients who are helping the parents.
Right.
Sometimes we'll get involved to help the parents, just as either pro bono or just as part of the services. But it's something they never envisioned, but they never planned.
Right. And I think people also underestimate how important it is to start early in your financial life, because you can do so much more. You can plan for all these different stages of your life. And so young people, just in my opinion, aren't getting this financial advice. This is exactly why we wanted to do this session, is because so many people need this badly and they're not getting it, or they think, like you said, you know, when I'm retiring, then I'll start planning. But you're right, you can't do that. It's kind of like real estate's the same way. There's this adage that people use that say, don't wait to buy real estate and then wait, like to allow the compounding over time. And that's where you really can benefit. And I think financial planning is similar in that the earlier you start, whether it be retirement planning or putting money aside for investments, it compounds over time. People underestimate how impactful that can be.
Exactly, because when you look at people's lives, if you're younger, starting out, you don't have the family obligations. Your first big goal is buying a house. The next is, you know, you need a new car. You know, all of a sudden you turn around and 20 years went by and now you're worried about college and retirement, but you were paying for everything else. The early years when you don't have all those responsibilities, maxing out on your 401k or 403b retirement plans, saving as much as you can, because later on you may not be able to afford to save as much. And at least you've got a good start. And that's the most important thing, is, you know, getting that good start, without a doubt.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways from today, is to start as early as you can. You can't go backwards in time. Obviously, nobody has a time machine, but start now. If you haven't already started, start now.
And the last thing I'll say about that, you know, it's like you don't feel well, you have a problem. You wait to go to the doctor until it's so bad and now it's too late. You want to go early when you first are seeing something so they can diagnose it and go forward. And I realize, you know, that the medical analogies, you know, are there's so many of them, but there is a similarity. Take care of, you know, diagnose what you need to do now so that you'll be okay in the future.
Absolutely. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Your
pleasure.
insight is very valuable. Your resume is impressive as always, and I just always enjoy talking with you and sharing your insight. I hope that the group has learned a lot of new things, but mainly just that the value of planning is so significant and the impact of it is so much greater when you start early.
Right.
I think those are some of the main takeaways that we had. So thank you, Scott, so much for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us. For those of you who joined us live, thank you for joining. If there are any questions, by all means, put them in the Q&A. But I think we've covered a lot of great topics today. I'm going to share my screen again, just real briefly. Okay. So again, today's co-host, Scott Kahan, all of his information is here. Our next session will be December 7th, which is going to be Retirement Planning 101. We'll have another great guest speaker to be announced, but that's going to be another one, kind of an extension of what we just talked about today. Don't wait, start early. And so if you want to connect with either Scott or I, here's our contact information. And with that, we will end today's session. But Scott, thank you again. And thank you all for joining us. And those who are viewing the recorded sessions, we look forward to connecting with you as well. And please spread the word. If you found value in this, please reach out to us. We can help you get signed up for future sessions and benefit from all the experts that we're going to be highlighting. This is going to be an ongoing series. It's free. It's open to anyone and everyone who needs help with financial matters and sharpening their financial pencil. So thank you again, Scott, and we look forward to seeing everybody again next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.